At 42, Michael Reed was the kind of man no one would ever expect to end up in trouble with the government. He wasn't rich. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't the kind of person who played dangerous games with money. He lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, in a modest house with beige siding and a small yard he mowed every Saturday morning. He drove a 10-year-old Toyota, arrived early at work, paid his bills on time, and kept to himself. The kind of man who seemed invisible by design. But life has a way of punishing the people who think danger only falls on those who go looking for it. And in Michael's case, danger came from a place he thought was harmless, a small $200 tax deduction, something so ordinary, something so trivial, something so easy to ignore, and yet it would dismantle the next 6 years of his life. It began in the winter of 2017, when Michael was sitting in the waiting room of a cheap tax preparation office near a strip mall. His previous accountant had retired, and instead of finding a reputable replacement, he did what many people do. He chose the cheapest option close to home. The office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. Stacks of binders crowded the reception desk. A dusty plant leaned sideways near the window. Behind the counter was a woman in her 50s, wearing thick glasses, typing loudly on a keyboard. The sign outside said Fast Refund Tax Services, and below it, in faded red letters, We get you more back. Michael didn't think much of it. He just wanted to get his tax return done quickly. He had a busy week at work, deadlines to meet, bills to pay, and he didn't want to spend hours dealing with paperwork. When his name was called, he sat down across from a man in a wrinkled shirt who introduced himself as Doan. Doan spoke fast, barely paused to breathe, and seemed to care more about finishing returns quickly than explaining anything. Michael handed over his W-2 South, his receipts, his pay stubs. Doan typed, clicked, nodded, and kept saying the same phrase, "We'll get you something good this year." At one point, Doan asked him a simple question. "Do you ever work from home? Even a little?" Michael nodded. "Well, actually, sometimes I answer emails from home, yeah, that counts. That's a home office deduction." Michael hesitated. "I don't really have an office. It's just the kitchen table." Doan waved a hand dismissively. "No problem. Everyone does it. It's just a small deduction. Trust me, it's fine." Michael didn't press. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions about tax law or IRS rules. He assumed Doan, the man sitting behind a desk with a certificate on the wall, knew what he was doing. The deduction, exactly $200. It didn't dramatically change his refund. It didn't raise any immediate flags. It didn't seem like anything at all. For the first few months, life continued completely unchanged. Then, in early July, a letter arrived. A plain white envelope from the Department of the Treasury. Michael didn't think much of it until he tore it open. The paper inside was formal, cold, printed in black ink. "We have selected your tax return for examination." A single word in the middle of the page carried all the weight. Audit. Michael stared at it, reading it twice, 3 times. His chest tightened, his hands shook slightly. The letter didn't accuse him of a crime. It didn't demand money. It simply asked for documentation regarding several line items on his return, including the $200 home office deduction. He didn't panic yet. He thought it was a mistake. He thought he could simply explain that he didn't know that his tax preparer had handled it. He called the tax office. The line rang 8 times before someone picked up. "This is Fast Refund Tax Services. Please hold." He waited 17 minutes before someone spoke again. When he explained the letter, the woman sighed. "Oh, another one. Yeah, the IRS has been checking Home Office deductions this year. Should I be worried? No, it's probably nothing. Just send them what they want." "What exactly do they want?" "Proof that you have a separate Home Office." Michael was silent. "I don't." "Well, then just tell them that. I'm sure it'll be fine." But it wasn't fine. 2 months later, he received the second letter. This one wasn't neutral. It wasn't polite. It wasn't patient. It was a notice of proposed changes. According to the letter, because he had claimed an ineligible deduction, the return had to be recalculated. Along with that, the IRS intended to review previous years as well. Suddenly, the issue wasn't $200 anymore. It was thousands. And something else happened, something he didn't know was even possible. The IRS flagged his return for inconsistencies that matched certain algorithmic patterns used to detect underreported income. It was automatic, not personal, not malicious. A machine analyzing numbers. And once a machine decides you're interesting, the government becomes curious. A full audit was opened. His bank statements were requested. His credit card statements. His PayPal transactions. Even his Venmo history. Everything he touched financially was pulled into the spotlight. The process stretched out for months, then years. One letter turned into dozens. Phone calls, emails, verifications, corrections. Every step seemed to reveal something new. The IRS wanted to re-examine. His savings began to evaporate. The first major blow came in 2019, when he was told he owed back taxes for previous years based on recalculated estimates, not because he had committed fraud, but because the IRS believed his returns were incorrectly prepared, and he had no way to prove otherwise. His accountant Doan had disappeared. Fast refund tax services had closed. The phone number was disconnected. Michael was alone now. By 2020, he had emptied his emergency fund. By 2021, he had cashed out a part of his 401k, paying penalties just to keep up with the mounting interest. And by 2022, the IRS had filed a lien on his home. Not once in any of this had Michael tried to deceive the government. Not once had he knowingly manipulated numbers. Not once had he intended to cheat or hide anything. He had simply trusted the wrong person. And the system does not forgive ignorance. In the fall of 2022, the worst letter arrived. Your property may be subject to seizure if the outstanding balance is not resolved immediately. He didn't lose the house. He eventually negotiated a payment plan, but by then almost everything else was gone. His savings, years of retirement contributions, a portion of his income for the next decade, and perhaps worst of all, his peace. Michael felt like a ghost inside his own life. He stopped sleeping well, stopped going out, stopped answering calls from friends. He withdrew into a shell of quiet shame. People think financial ruin comes from huge mistakes. Massive loans, reckless spending, intentional fraud. But sometimes it comes from something incredibly small. Something that would barely cover a week of groceries. Something as insignificant as a line in a tax return. $200. That was the price of the deduction. But the real cost would be much, much higher. In the spring of 2023, Michael sat again at his kitchen table, the same table where he had once signed documents without reading them, trusting they were harmless. Spread out in front of him were the final calculations, penalties, interest, reassessments, professional fees. The total financial damage caused by that one deduction exceeded $84,000, more than a year of his salary, more than a decade of savings. No crime, no malicious intent. Just a small shortcut that spiraled out of control. A system designed to catch real fraud had crushed an ordinary man who didn't understand the rules he was playing under. Michael will spend the next 8 to 10 years paying the remainder of the debt he negotiated. He no longer trusts anyone with his taxes. He no longer takes shortcuts. He no longer assumes that something everyone does is actually allowed. He lives quietly, carefully, cautiously. But sometimes, late at night, while sitting at that same kitchen table under a dim overhead light, he stares at the papers he keeps in a neatly organized folder. The reminder of how it all began. A $200 deduction. A signature he didn't question. A stranger he trusted too quickly. People imagine that life's biggest disasters come with blaring alarms or obvious warnings. But Michael's story proves something else. Sometimes the decisions that destroy us feel too small to notice. And the cost of a small mistake can follow you for years. If you think something is harmless, if you think it's no big deal, if you're trusting someone because it's easier than understanding the details, remember Michael, because a shortcut worth $200 once ended up costing him everything he had saved in a lifetime. And it all began with a single signature. A signature he'll never forget.